Okay, we'll get started. So again, I'm Sara Duckler. I'm in the Engineering Unit Manager in our Water Resources Policy and Planning Unit here at the Santa Clara Valley Water District. We've been working on an integrated One Water plan for a couple of years now, and I have to say we're not completed with that yet. So what you'll see is a work in progress, some of our completed items, and some of them that we're still working on, but I still thought that would be pretty interesting to you. So let's see, I know that the slides are a little slow going one from the other. So the Santa Clara Valley Water District is the primary water resources agency in Santa Clara County in California. We're located at the southern end of the San Francisco Bay in the heart of Silicon Valley. So this map shows we have actually 5 major watersheds. You can see 6, but that pink one up in the corner is drains to Alameda County, and it's up in the hills, and we don't actually work with it. So we have 5 major watersheds. 4 of them drain northwards to San Francisco Bay, and 1 of them drains southwards to the Pajaro River and Monterey Bay. The district is responsible for 3 primary mission areas, providing clean, safe water, flood protection, and stewardship of streams on behalf of the county's nearly 2 million residents. And we're pretty fortunate in that our watersheds are almost fully contained within the county boundary, which is our jurisdictional boundary. Most of our watersheds are fully contained. They start in the hills and flow down to the bay. A couple of them cross jurisdictions, and we have joint power authorities with our neighboring counties to help manage those watersheds. Oops. Okay, so what is One Water? When this next slide loads for you, I hope it's going faster. This is our One Water logo. And the district is actually responsible for or involved in many different aspects of the water cycle here in Santa Clara County. So if you just look at these, we've got stormwater, floodwater, water for habitat, water for the baylands, raw water, imported water, recycled water, and groundwater. And think about for a second what I just said, that we're responsible for 3 primary mission areas: flood protection, water supply, and environmental stewardship. You can't neatly fit those 3 areas into all of these aspects of water. They overlap. Some of them fall into multiple categories of our mission. And so for the first time, this effort is to integrate all 3 of our missions into one planning process that looks at water in all of its different forms in an integrated way. Okay, so today's presentation, the making of a 50-year plan. First, we'll start out by looking at the big picture. I'm going to give you an overview of the process for creating this plan, and then we'll look at the product, or what we've produced so far and what we're working on producing now. And then I want to pull back the curtain a little bit and give you a look behind the scenes and talk about a couple of components that we're working on. These are works in progress, but they're really interesting and somewhat unique, and just thought I'd want to share them with you if you wanted to see what we're moving forward on. So again, this is a living document, which means that we can update it as we learn our way through it. We welcome your comments or your advice if you've been through similar exercises, and I'll share with you a way to get in touch with us as we go through the slides. Okay, first of all, the process. Little secret here that you all know, the process is the people. But this next slide, hopefully when it catches up to you, shows the master planning approach, and it looks a little bit more mechanical than it actually was. But first we developed a framework that gave us sort of a policy basis for the planning effort, and we did that at the countywide scale. Then concurrently and subsequently, we're compiling existing conditions and data to describe the watersheds and how they function. Then identifying constraints, challenges, and opportunities, which become the basis of the recommendation for priority opportunities to our board of directors and working with partners to bring things to fruition. But actually, all of that really has a lot to do with the people and getting the right people involved. So the process really is the people. Okay, quick view of the timeline of active participation. So right around the middle of 2014, we initiated the process, the planning process. We started putting together our stakeholder outreach plan, what groups we would bring together into this, and how we would do it. So then moving into 2015, the meat of that whole year was a lot of really intense working meetings where we worked through some of the issues with our stakeholders. And then into 2016, we'd worked out some of the major issues and began working more with our technical teams to develop the products. So we actually had about 4 major working groups, and I want to just give you a quick look at those. The first group that met actually was the agency planning team, and that is a coalition of federal and state resource agencies, including U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. EPA, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Cal Fish and Wildlife Service, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, NOAA Fisheries, and Cal DWR, Department of Water Resources. So we brought all of them together, and this group served more as an advisory group. They just wanted to see the progress, check in on what we're doing, offer some suggestions, but it wasn't a working group. They didn't develop the plan, and it was not a permitting exercise. So we met a little more frequently in the beginning as we got that framework off the ground, and then about once a year after that. Then the big effort was our stakeholder working group. This was a group of 30 participants with their alternates, so 30 participants, 30 alternates, and we pulled this together by reaching out to all of the various organizations and stakeholders that we typically work with. We developed a charter with them so that they all knew what they were coming in with us to do together. These groups represented academic, agricultural and business interests, civic interests, environmental advocacy groups, environmental justice, local municipalities, the Resource Conservation District, transportation, tribal interests, and water supply professionals. So these were facilitated meetings, and during that you can see there's an intense working period in the 2015 time range. We had subcommittees and ad hoc committees to work on some of the more technical issues as we were developing. So this group really provided a lot of input and review as we were developing work products in the Countywide Framework Plan. We also had a Science Advisory Hub. This was convened and facilitated by the San Francisco Estuary Institute, SFEI, a local science advisory kind of nonprofit group here in the Bay Area. They reached out independently from us and pulled in 5 very well-respected scientists with local expertise in a broad range of topics that we were looking at. And this group was facilitated by SFEI and provided us with advice and kind of an overview review. And they met, again, kind of during that intense working period in 2015. Of course, we had to work with our own internal staff. The Water District has a lot of internal resources, experts in a lot of different fields because we do so many different types of water management planning. So we had subject matter experts from all areas of the districts. We worked together to identify opportunities. We had a lot of open communications cross disciplines that didn't necessarily normally work together because we were really trying to integrate and break down those silos that we've all lived with. And that group sort of started out at the beginning kind of checking in on what was happening when we were doing more policy work, and as we got more into the meat of the matter, we just met a lot. There were actually upward of 12 different working groups because of so many different technical areas of expertise, so they were meeting, more than weekly with the various different groups. It was just really almost continuous. Also, we had sort of a whole series of these almost one-off outreach meetings where we would be invited to local organizations or agencies. They wanted to hear what we were doing, so we would make a presentation and have a discussion, and they were welcome to join the conversation, provide input, get onto the blog, and become active participants that way. And those meetings pretty much once or twice a month for the duration, because people were pretty interested in what we're doing. In a minute, when I get to the product, you'll see that we first did this countywide framework, and now we're working on those individual watershed plans, which are more specific and more technical. So as we wrapped up work on the countywide framework, which this is showing, we started the Coyote working group. So that's our first watershed that we're doing really intense technical work on. So that is pretty much the process. The process is the people doing technical work as we go and checking in with each other to develop the product. Okay, so to date we have developed the countywide framework. That's the draft plan that was released at the end of 2016, and that's available on our website. If any of you are interested, you'll see that in a couple of minutes. So the framework is countywide. It develops and provides the policy level guidance, and of course was developed with a lot of stakeholder input. Basically its job is it's the jacket for the box set of all of the individual specific watershed plans that we'll be developing. Those are the ones where we dive in and look at those specific on the ground issues relative to the individual watersheds. And each one of them, even though they're all clumped together in the South San Francisco Bay, they have their own individual types of things going on, geology and the way they're settled, the land uses. So we've actually been working on the Coyote watershed plan. That's that pink one. The first one for a while, probably a couple of years now. We started out with almost a back of the envelope look at it where we sort of know what's going on, and we wrote that up. But since then we've really started to do a deeper dive and try to pull out more specific data so that we can make better and more specific and more integrated recommendations than the business as usual. So we wanted to take a landscape view, and part of taking that landscape view is developing for us this custom landscape model for Santa Clara County, and it shows the water influence processes and how they interact with one another. What you're seeing here is the contemporary model. We also first actually developed for this same landscape the historical conditions pre-European contact model. So this same exact landscape view, but without all of the human interventions. But this is what we live with now, the modern day water system, and it shows, you know, the water really interacts. We've got creeks coming down from the hills, we have reservoirs up in the hills, we have creeks that used to be meandering or soaking into the landscape that are now channelized to head straight out to the San Francisco Bay. We have a lot of interaction with the groundwater. The groundwater in Santa Clara County is one of our major sources of quality drinking water. So we percolate into it and we pull out from it. And we wanted to get all that down so that as we work through the issues, we have something to reference back to. And again, you'll remember all that from the logo, all of those water drips. That kind of is another picture of what you just saw, the landscape model, where there are just so many different types of water, and they really do all interact. Okay, so the countywide framework, this was the fun stuff because this was policy. We got to think big. Here's a picture of what we got. Working with our stakeholders, we developed one vision, 5 integrated goals, 10 objectives, which are cross-integrated with those goals, and then strategies, a whole list of them, too many to talk about today, and then our sort of implementation opportunities, which are the 4 Ps, policy, in order of what on your screen, projects, programs, policies, and partnerships. So that is the big overview of what is in the countywide framework, and I'll just show you some of the high levels. The vision is to manage Santa Clara County water resources holistically and sustainably to benefit people and the environment in a way that is informed by community values. Clearly a group effort, but we like what it says. It says what we want it to do. Okay, next on that framework chart, the 5 integrated goals. So I'm going to read you these goals because we love them. But I want you to think about where we started. We're a pretty unique water district. We do water supply, flood protection, and stream stewardship. So we have 3 core missions. But when we really dug in and talked to our stakeholders, we ended up with 5 integrated goals. So 1, valued and respected rain, to manage rainwater to improve flood protection, water supply, and ecosystem health. Healthful and reliable water, to enhance the quantity and quality of water to support beneficial uses. 3, ecologically sustainable streams and watersheds, to protect, enhance, and sustain healthy and resilient stream ecosystems. 4, resilient baylands, to protect and sustain healthy and resilient baylands, ecosystems, and infrastructure. And 5, community collaboration, working in partnership with an engaged community to champion wise decisions on water resources. Okay, so 5 integrated goals. What's really great and interesting here is that you can't take our 3 mission areas and drop them into those individually. They're so cross-pollinated that they're just really a unique way for us here to look at how we might manage water. So we've gone from 3 sort of almost siloed areas of business to trying to look at it in this more integrated way where there's just a lot of crossover between the goals. And we like that. We did it on purpose. It's harder to measure that way because some things show up in more than one place, but we like the way that it's forcing you to look at a bigger picture and how things do interact. Oops. Okay, and then 10 objectives. I don't think I want to read all 10 of them because I just read the 5 goals, but I will just share. These are a little bit more kind of single purpose, but they're still integrated. There's still definitely crossover between the 10 objectives, and they don't map, 10 objectives to 5 goals, 2 to each. The whole thing is sort of integrated and cross-pollinated. But if you look at them, they're not laid out in order of priority, just so that you know that, but they are sort of related topic-wise. And the first 3, A through C, relate to our water supply services. And then C through G, notice that C showed up twice, relate to our flood protection and our stewardship activities. So for many of us, this is probably ironic to most of the world, but to many of us, flood protection and stewardship go together naturally because that's where we're trying to manage our creeks in a holistic way. So the first 3, water supply, C through G, flood protection and stream stewardship or stewardship activities, and then H, I, and J are more sort of overarching issues that we wanted to make sure that we captured as objectives. Okay, so that's sort of a summary of our countywide framework plan. And I wanted to point you to one of our other products that we love, which is the website. The address is up here, and it'll come up again at the end of this show if you want to visit it. It's a great place to go click around, explore what we have. What we put up here is both our works in progress and our products. So you can see where we're going and you can see where we've landed. There's opportunity to engage through the website. You can send comments. You can get on the email list. You can just see how things are developing. And this will come up in the next section of my talk too. So also that final draft of the countywide framework plan is available here under data and docs. And it's a beautiful report. I highly recommend taking a look at it. So I think that's what I wanted to say there. before we jump behind the scenes and look at a couple of activities where we're digging deep and trying to get a more unique perspective into our One Water plan and our framework. So the first one is developing indicator metrics. So we looked quickly a minute ago at the structure, vision, 5 goals, 10 objectives. We're going to peel out of those objectives, and we're going to use those objectives to measure the plan's success, basically. To get to those objectives, we want to track our progress getting there. So we're not starting there, but we want to find metrics or measures that will tell us how far along we are on the path and how much further we have to go. So we decided to dig into those objectives to create metrics. So not only does that tell us where we are, tracks our progress, but it's also going to help us decide where to prioritize our efforts to try to get us to where we want to go. Okay, so let me just break that down a little bit for you. So for each objective, moving from left to right, because they are sort of a little bit integrated and multifaceted, we couldn't measure them directly, hard as we tried. So we ended up breaking those down into attributes. Each of those 10 objectives has probably between like 2 and 4 different attributes. Those are the key components of the objective, the building blocks that together would describe the objective. And then each attribute we were able to break down into measurable metrics. Some of them have more than one. Most of them have more than one metric. So a couple of metrics build up to an attribute, a couple of attributes build up to the objective, but we're trying to get into a sequence where we can collect data and pull it together and see how we're doing. Now the last column is the targets. So those are quantified endpoints that show success. So in order to track where we're going, we need to know where we're going. So we need to kind of figure out, and we're going to be, talking to, again, a lot of our people. Where do we want to be in 50 years? That's the question. That's a tough one, actually. Okay, so once we've set those targets for each objective, we can actually normalize against that as a percentage. Where are we? So let me just say that this measurement chart is completely hypothetical. It's just to show that for the 10 objectives, once we go out and get all the data and roll it back up from metrics to attributes to objectives and normalize it against the target we set for each one, so each one will have a different target, but we should be able to tell if we're getting to like what percentage of that full target. And then we can throw that all down onto a bar graph and look at, wow, in one picture, how are we doing here with respect to those 10 objectives? And when we do that, we can look at some of those high ones and go, we're doing great, let's keep doing what we're doing. And some of those low ones and say, I think we might need to spend a little bit more time and resources here to bring those up to our target, or do we need to readjust our target? So it allows us to compare really different ideas and concepts on a level playing field, and allows us to prioritize our future activities. So you saw we had broken, in order to make it measurable, we broke those objectives down into attributes and then metrics. We can, this is again another completely hypothetical bar graph. We built this before we even had decided what our metrics were. And there's 10 objectives, but only 6 are on this graph, just so that you know, don't go like thinking that this is what we're finding yet. It's just completely hypothetical. But to show that with this system of being able to normalize against our targets, we can look at how we're doing on a finer grained scale. Let's look at our specific attributes within those objectives. Maybe one of them's doing great, but one of them needs more attention to bring the whole thing up. So again, it could be a system of prioritizing our actions, as well as a system of tracking how close and how fast we're moving towards our targets. And then another factor that we haven't dove into yet, you can see there's different bar widths here. So there's another ability to basically weight the objectives or the attributes or even the metrics, because you can drill down one more layer. You make them wider, you make them more important on this graph of real estate. You make them narrower, you're saying, well, that one's maybe less important. So we actually haven't gone there yet, but it's somewhere that we could go. Okay, so we had to come up with those attributes and metrics for 10 objectives, and this was a process. Lots of those people were involved in what should we measure, what can we measure. So here's an example of one of those objectives, Objective E, expanded and protected buffer lands adjacent to water bodies, and how we ended up breaking it up into 3 separate attributes. Each one of those attributes has 2 or 1 metrics associated it, and you can see that we're still looking for targets. We're not really completely there yet, but we have the system and we are populating it. At this point, we have draft attributes and metrics for all 10 of our objectives. We're pretty far down the road to finalizing those, and we're actually populating those with real data. So here's a screenshot of back to our website. You can go on our website and go look under this Goals and Objectives tab, and you can see a little description of our idea of measuring project progress with the metrics. And then for each of the 10, it's clickable, and it'll pull up a table just like this to show you what we are proposing to measure or what we are collecting data on right now. I will say that as a 50-year plan, we started out thinking, well, where do we want to be in 50 years? Let's, what's your dream? Let's, none of us will probably be around or working here anymore, so let's just like pie in the sky. What would the watershed look like if it were just really great and amazing in 50 years? It turns out that there's some problems with taking that approach. Like, we weren't quite sure what to measure in terms of where we are right now if we set our targets kind of almost so idealistically that we weren't totally sure we'd ever get there. And more practically, this program is not about collecting data and going out and getting fresh data and doing measurement. This program is about setting up goals and objectives and creating an implementation plan out of multi-objective opportunities to take us there. We wanted to focus our energy there, not on data collection. We do a lot of data collection already. A lot of our partners that we work with do a lot of data collection already. So we had to rein it in and decide that the metrics for this plan, for this first version of the plan, had to be based on either data that we're already collecting or that's easily obtainable that somebody else is collecting, or data that we can pretty much measure ourselves with existing data like maps or GIS information that we could pull together without starting up a whole new measuring and monitoring program. So we had to hone it in and create attributes and metrics that we could actually populate with real data this year without starting up a whole new project. So that's what you would see here, these 10 objectives and all of their sets of related attributes and metrics. So I just wanted to kind of give that, but it is, again, a living document. So as we move forward, we may change what we measure, and we may change our targets if it seems too easy or too difficult. But we got to start somewhere. So here's where we're starting. We've already got most of our metrics decided on, and we spent the summer. We had a fantastic graduate student working with us all summer to go out and collect the data. Even though we said we're only going to get existing data or easily obtained or created data, it was pretty complicated to get the data for all of those. Again, we had 10 objectives. Each one had multiple attributes. Each attribute probably had multiple metrics. So we were talking in the order of 70 to 80 different metrics scattered throughout the district, through our partners, through published reports. So She went and interviewed people, pulled reports off the web, pulled reports out of our own library, did some original GIS analysis to try to get those metrics to what we really wanted without going out and collecting the data itself from the field. We collected already existing data and then processing it so that we could get to that form, that hypothetical idealistic form of the bar graph, like how are we doing? Turns out that's not as easy as we thought it would be. So some of the data is pretty simple, and it's stuff that we've already been collecting, and so we can just plop that right into a bar graph. Those are trend arrows showing, you know, against the 100% goal, where are we now and how are we doing? These ones are all trending upwards or it's been adjusted. Some of the data is a lot more complicated, and just collecting it and organizing it so that you can see where you are was a whole endeavor, and we're still not yet to the place where we've set those targets so that we can normalize everything to 100%. So the whole thing's a work in progress, but it is progressing. So let me just, another side note, since we limited ourselves to data that already exists, you might think, well, what's the value in that? The value is that we're bringing it all together in one place for one view, tracking this all with the one water view for the first time. And we're trying to boil it down so that we get really good simple indicators to find our progress as we go through time and to help guide our projects as we go through time to give us better progress. So instead of, I wonder how we're doing here, there, and there, we're going to have it all together in one, hopefully pretty easy to use, almost dashboard kind of setting. So that's the idea behind that. And our status for our metrics sub-project. We do have final draft metrics for all 10, enough to work with at this point. We're collecting the baseline data. We've been collecting it. We're very close. Uh-oh, my Internet Explorer is crashing. David, can you guys still see and hear me?
We can still see you. Just keep on going.
Okay. We're setting those targets as we go, and we are also anticipating bringing this back to our Science Hub for review in the winter, or the fall, I'm sorry, fall or winter of 2017. Okay, so the second behind the scenes that I wanted...
Sorry, Sarah, really quick, can you close that window? The Internet Explorer has stopped working window.
Okay.
Thank you.
The second behind the scenes little project that I wanted to share with you, it's sort of a pilot project that we're working to take a fresh look at assessing flood vulnerabilities. And again, we're starting in on that deeper dive to the Coyote watershed. So we're looking specifically at Coyote watershed. So this is a shift from our normal way of looking at flood risks and flood protection. It's brand new for us. We have not adopted it yet. We're not committed to using it, but we just wanted to take a different look at flooding and flood issues and flood protection, and I thought that the watershed community itself might be interested in it. So what we're challenging ourselves to do is to prioritize, or at least to find areas for those who need flood protection most, by looking simultaneously at the risks of flooding, the hazards of flooding, and the vulnerability of people who are subject to that flooding. So here's a FEMA map for an area in the Coyote watershed. Right in the center of the page is Upper Penitencia Creek. We'll focus on that in San Jose. And our traditional goal, this is a FEMA map, we've all seen these, would be to build a project that made this map smaller. So basically, we call it removing parcels from the floodplain. So we would pick those by trying to prevent the most economic damage with a project. So what that means and what's meant for us in the past is that higher value real estate would often attract and justify flood protection projects. But this method doesn't emphasize the areas that are the least equipped to handle those flood events, which are not the highest value areas. So we wanted to just take an alternative approach that would allow us to view and prioritize areas of high hazard, so deep water or fast-moving water, or more frequent events, or where those residents themselves are the most vulnerable to flooding. So we pulled together geospatial data. We've got a lot of it from a lot of different sources, and started down the road of doing a GIS analysis. So we were going to combine data sets for a more clear picture using, again, the physical hazard of flood depths layered with the statistical hazard, how often does this area flood, and then the social vulnerability. Who is the most vulnerable to flooding? Do they have access to resources to survive the flood or to recover from the flood? So let's take a look at what we saw. Okay, starting with the 1% flood depth map, and you've seen this. We see this now that we have 2D modeling. We don't even see those one-dimensional or that one shade FEMA map so much anymore. We are very used to seeing a depth map, which is great because it shows where the flooding is the most severe. And it's still giving us a good bit of detail. So you're probably familiar with this, but the deeper shading shows the deeper flooding. And we just quantified it if for every foot of flooding we went up a shade in the scale. Same thing with velocities. This map shows where there's fast-moving water for that same floodplain, and each shade goes up by 1 foot per second. So again, a little side note is that we typically kind of ignore street flooding because it doesn't damage buildings or homes. But we know that if the water is deep or fast-moving in the streets, it can really present a danger to anybody who's driving or even walking out there. It can be very dangerous and also very destructive to any cars that are just parked on the street, not even being used. So we kind of wanted to take a look at that. Okay, so we're going to combine the magic of GIS, these risk factors, depth and velocity, using that point system that I just described, to come up with a different look at a flood map. So this is sort of, we're dubbing it the flood hazard, which is combined depths and velocities, or the physical flood hazard. So you can see the darker areas are either deeper or faster or both. They're just the more dangerous areas. Okay, then we wanted to take a look at our statistical view, not the calculated statistical view, but how often has this area experienced problems in the past? Now, this district's been around for many decades. We've been keeping pretty good records for over 30 years, so we decided to use that. These dots and lines are our inspection locations. This is where we send out field people during storm events to look at areas that have historically had problems, either erosion of the creeks or floodwater overbanking. So we kind of know our hotspot areas already. So we got those in GIS now, so we mapped them. And we've been keeping track of the areas that have flooded in our GIS since back to 1982, although caveat, we haven't recorded this year's flood event into this system yet. We did have flooding in 2017. So the shading here, it's not depth, it's actually, we just piled on top of each other all of the different flood maps. So each event has a flood map. So if your area is flooded more than once, you're going to see a deeper shade of this orangey brown. So you can kind of see the areas that have been hit multiple times. Okay, so this is sort of the observed flood risk, and we're going to combine those in GIS just to see, you know, here's the areas that we kind of know are the risky problem areas. So we're using, again, the district's 30 years of institutional knowledge here to try to create a picture of you know, how much of these people suffered and what can we do about it. Okay, now is when we do something we've never done before. We wanted to look at the vulnerability of the population to flooding. So we found that the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, has actually created a social vulnerability index using data from the U.S. Census. So they look, and they did this for purposes of just like this, like what is the resistance of an area to a disaster, a natural disaster, or any kind of disaster? What is their resilience to be able to recover from it? So they looked at 4 different areas using census data again, and the census data is tied to census tracts on the map. So socioeconomic status, household composition and disability was a category, minority status and language, and housing and transportation. So for each one of those, I'll call them attributes, there's a number of different, I'll call them metrics, that the CDC was able to pull directly from census data and combine them and send it up the chain to give kind of a rating score for every tract in the country. How vulnerable are they? So if a tract scored in the top 10%, that is the most vulnerable 10% for any one of those 4 categories, was basically given a point. Since those are tied to the census tract, that means that we were able to grab that data and map it. And so you can see that in this area of East San Jose, we actually have areas of vulnerability that score the whole range. 0 is the area that just looks like an ortho photo because there's no points on it, no vulnerability points. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, we have all of those areas here in this little watershed. So that gives us some really good data that we've never looked at before in our flood risk assessments. So now we're going to take those 3 different types of assessment: the physical hazard, depth and velocity, the statistical hazard, how often has it happened before, and the social vulnerability, and combine those into one composite flood risk and vulnerability map. So this, with the, basically at a glance, is going to help us identify priority areas within the floodplain. This is a really different map than we've seen before. And again, this is kind of an experiment here just to see, does this give us good information? Is this useful for us? So we can create this map, but as we maybe want to focus in on some of those darker areas that show more risk and vulnerability, we can actually peel it back to say why, what's going on here, why did it score so many points? So it's a really fun and useful, interesting tool and way to use GIS. So what would be some next steps here? Well, to improve that flood risk analysis process, we would want to expand it to the watershed view, or maybe even the whole county view, so that we can just sort of do a quick visual. Where are the most vulnerable areas in our county? That's what we want to do, a watershed-wide view, and feed that into the One Water plan. We would want to look at transportation corridors, ingress and egress, evacuation routes. We can map critical facilities for their vulnerability: police stations, fire, hospitals, nursing homes, those types of things. We want to know where they are as we're making decisions about what to prioritize and what to do next. And then when we get a map like that, we also want to just do an analysis for land use. Like, are there people actually living there in what looks to be very vulnerable areas, living or working there? It may just actually be a warehouse district and it came up funky on the census tract. So we want to make sure we know what's there. Or is it a park or an open space, something that we don't necessarily have to worry about? So we can do that in GIS as well. We can apply different weights to different factors. And then finally, to step it back into the whole One Water integrated plan, we can take an analysis like this and add it to a similar analysis being done for different One Water factors. So here's an example. On the left, we've got a very similar analysis that we did looking at biological factors. Where are there species of special concerns or opportunities for protection or preservation? Different types of water resources blend in. So the scale's not here. You can't see exactly what we were analyzing, but I just wanted to let you know that we're looking at this in all of the different areas within the One Water plan. And on the right-hand side, you can see back to an exercise we did with our stakeholders, internal and external. Where are there opportunities for integrated multipurpose planning or problems? And those are dots on the map. And all of this stuff's now in GIS. So we can combine them in different layers and look at them from different angles and really get in there to figure out what's happening in the watershed and where are our best opportunities to do something about it. So just a couple of closing thoughts on this 50-year planning horizon. It's really been a balance between the idealism and practicalism. I don't know if that's a word, practicality. The idealism is, wow, a 50-year plan, let's, go for gold. And it was sort of, it's reflected in our vision and our goals and our objectives, what would be the ideal here. But the practicality is, what can we actually do? And more importantly, what can we actually pay for? So that's more reflected in our metrics. What can we really hands-on look at and do? And it'll be reflected in our implementation plans as we roll those out. So on the side of the idealism, if not now, when? Okay. That's it. I wanted to give you some resources to stay in touch with us. The address of our website. You can email us. You can email me, Sara Duckler, at valleywater.org, Duckler. And then the project manager who's pulling this all together is Brian Mendenhall. His email is here too, bmendenhall@valleywater.org.